So hello, and thank you for tuning in with the Illinois Small Business Development Center at Chinese Mutual Aid Association. A reminder that this webinar is being recorded for training purposes. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please enter them in the chat box below or email them directly to the center. The Illinois Small Business Development Center at Chinese Mutual Aid Association is brought to you through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration and the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Through this partnership, we provide one-on-one business advising at no cost, and our services range from COVID-19 relief, pre-venture startup, and educational webinars like today. Today's topic on addressing the anti-Asian violence and hate in our communities is not a new issue. And unfortunately, the harsh reality is that it is part of our nation's history. And this past year deeply hurt our API families. We're not going to be able to resolve everything today, but our goal today is to help everybody stay informed, promote dialogue, education, accountability, and enhance our partnerships. While the data in our neighborhood does not reflect a high number of reported hate crimes, our first speaker, Commander Brendan McCrudden of the 20th District, would like to emphasize how important it is to come forward if you have a report to file, and to file in a timely manner. If you see something, say something. Commander, thank you so much for joining us. Could you give us an update on what's been going on in the neighborhood and also talk to us about the reporting process and procedures, please?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us today and share any ideas and thoughts that you have. The first thing I want to say is that even though I know there's been a lot of publicity across the nation, our district, the 20th District, is one of the lowest crime districts in the city, and we're working hard to maintain that with the efforts of our officers, but also the cooperation with the community as well. And we actually have no reported hate crimes in this district of any sort for this year. Now, again, I know there's some folks are saying, well, not everything gets reported, and that's one of the issues we hope to address today. Now, there are issues of, there is crime in our district. There's no doubt about that. We're always working to reduce it, but there's crime that is not any indication that it's generated by any sort of bias or hate along those lines as far as reported crimes. There may be some things that have happened that have not been reported that we're unaware of. One of the purposes today is try to get people to be more comfortable if there is any reluctance to contact the police or any fear to contact the police, or sometimes just maybe a dismissive idea that, well, it wasn't that serious. You know, we do want to be aware of these things. But again, in the 20th District, there have been no reported hate crimes of any sort across the board. Again, I'm not saying that there weren't any motives that were generated by hate or bias, but that wasn't something that came out in the commission of the offense. So have there been batteries and robberies and car thefts, carjackings? Yes, all across the board, but nothing that was any indication that someone was targeted because of any sort of, you can name it, any sort of identification. So we're glad to have that, but if it is out there and it's just not being reported, then we would like to know about that as well too. So those are just a few of the things I wanted to bring up right off the bat. Okay.
Great, thank you so much, Commander. And Commander, just from a high level, what can we do together to help people feel safe in the communities? Well, from a high level, can you give us, shed some light on that?
Yes, absolutely, thank you. One of the big things is, just as you mentioned before, if you see something, to report it. Now, one of the times, and this is across the board and not just in the Asian community, but sometimes someone says, well, yeah, something happened, but it wasn't happening right there, or the incident already had ended, so I didn't think I should call 911 because it wasn't still happening. So then sometimes they say, well, later I'll get home and maybe I'll call 311 or something like that. So we just want to try and bring out some of the education along the, you know, what is 911 as opposed to dialing 311. So 911 is something that it's happening immediately, it's happening now, or maybe it's something that's escalating. Maybe it's an argument, but it looks like it might get a little more heated. It looks like there's a potential for violence. That's a 911 call. If something did happen, we'll say what we call a battery. Somebody hit somebody, shoved someone, punched, pushed, kicked, whatever, slapped, something along those lines, but the offender flees, runs off, or leaves the scene, sometimes gets in a car and drives away. That's still a 911 call, because when the caller gives a description of what happened, maybe the direction that the offender left in, that gives our officers, as they're responding to the scene, somebody to look out for. So it might be a description, oh, it was a tall guy wearing a red jacket, or maybe the guy jumped into a blue Monte Carlo, whatever the details might be. As our officers converge over there to try and locate the victim and see if any further help is needed, as they're traveling in that direction, they're looking out for that person, for that description of the possible offender or the vehicle that they might be in, or sometimes it's a bicycle. You got on a mountain bike, a blue mountain bike, and is going westbound on Catalpa, for example. Well, now that's something for our officers to zero in on. If they see someone matching that description, they can stop that person away from the scene. And then what we do is called a show up. We will bring that person back to the scene and say, hey, based on the description given, we think this might be the offender, the person who did commit that crime, whether it's, a threat, an actual battery where physical contact was made, or something was stolen, or whatever the case would be. And then if the person says, yes, that is the person, then we know that we have the right person in custody. Sometimes the person is definitely that, nope, that's not him, looks similar description, but that's not the person. At that point, we would document that we stopped this person, and that person was free to go on their way then, and it might have been an inconvenience for that person, but that's just part of the investigatory process. Along those lines as well, too, someone may say, well, I think it was that person, but I'm not quite sure. I didn't get a real good look at him, but that looks like the same clothing. He's wearing the same kind of shoes, a very similar backpack, or whatever the case. That gives us a chance to hold on to that person. Maybe we can develop the case a little bit further. We can ask for other witnesses on the scene. We could try to recover some video evidence that can either prove or disprove that person was involved. So again, a 911 call is something that it's happening now, or it's an incident that appears to be escalating, something that just happened. Now, if it was one of those things where, well, I went and checked my garage and it looks like I was gone for the week, looks like someone came in and took my bicycle. I forgot to lock the door. That would be a 311 call. I mean, they could still call 911 and they'll transfer them over to a report taker, but it's not something that has to be an officer needs to respond to at the moment. So we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that, and we are working towards translating some of our pamphlets that we have that will tell you what's a 911 call and what's a 311 call, and we're getting those translated into different languages as we speak, and we'll get those out into the community as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Commander, for that update. Really appreciate it. Next, I'm very delighted to welcome the Supervisory Special Agent, Joe Holtzman, to give us an update on what's been going on with the FBI Chicago. Agent Holtzman, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. Sorry, I had to unmute there. I appreciate it. I saw some comments that the SAC's video was low volume. Apologize for that, but for those who couldn't really hear him, the main message here is that this is one of the FBI's top priorities. We take it very seriously. We work hand in hand with the local police, with the local state's attorney's office, with our U.S. attorney's office, and we will dedicate any and all necessary resources to these matters when they arise. We also obviously dedicate these resources to preventing and promoting people from coming, to come forward when they've been victimized for these matters. The other part of the message that the SEC put forth is that we really do need to diversify our ranks within the FBI. So he wants to encourage, and he did in that message, if you know of, if you are interested, I've been trying to recruit Tommy. If you're interested in joining the FBI, please consider that. We need to diversify our ranks, not just from the Asian community, but from all ethnic communities to really represent the people of the United States. In any case, I don't want to step on the toes of my colleague from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, but I do want to put forth that the FBI does have its own resources for hate crimes. You see these statutes up on the screen, and I gave to Tommy some pamphlets and brochures that are available in a wide variety of AAPI languages to make available to the group here. So he'll send those out after this. But I don't want you to focus too much on these statutes. The fact of the matter is, the people here are not attorneys. And my concern is when people focus too closely on the wording in these statutes, they don't report things. And this is the message that the commander had, and this is part of the message that I'm sure my colleague at the state's attorney's office had. The number one barrier is people not reporting when they have been victimized by a hate crime, by a person filled with hate. And I don't want the public to take it upon themselves to say, well, this doesn't really rise to the level, or this isn't going to concern the FBI. They're not going to investigate this. The fact of the matter is, if you have been victimized by hate, if you have been targeted because of your representation in a particular group, you need to report that. It is so important. I cannot stress it enough. And you can't over-report it. You shouldn't say, well, I've reported it to CPD, so I don't need to report it to anywhere else. The good news is the Chicago Police Department has an incredibly robust hate crime structure. If you report a hate crime to Chicago Police Department, it does get reported up. What I will say is that the suburbs don't have that same that same level of reporting. The suburban police departments don't always have that structure. They haven't all been trained the way that I would like to see them trained, that I think we would all like to see them trained. So I think it's extremely important. You can report something to your local police department. You can also then call the state's attorney's office, and you can call the FBI, and you can call the US attorney's office. We all have our own investigative and victim resources to help. And if you call me and I say, you know what, this is more of a state matter, but I will help you broker that partnership with CPD, and we will work these things together, whether it's going to get prosecuted on the federal side or the state side. The biggest thing is what we don't want, what none of us want, none of us investigators or prosecutors or victim specialists or anybody, is to have a victim suffering in silence. And that's the concern. That's the barrier we're really trying to break down. So that's what the FBI's fight is here. We're not trying to take control of the hate crimes investigations. We're trying to help work hand in hand so that victims don't suffer alone, and that something is done about it. So I'm not going to tread on any more time, but I'm happy to answer questions. Tommy, if you had any more specific questions for me.
No, we'll do questions at the end, but thank you so much, Aiden Holzman, for being here. Really appreciate it. And folks, we will be doing another presentation with the FBI this summer again, so stay tuned for more details on that. And then finally, our main presentation, I'm very grateful to Mr. David Williams, supervisor at the Special Prosecution Bureaus of the Cook County State Attorney's Office, for being here today. Mr. Williams prepared a very informative and educational presentation for us, so we are so lucky for him to present today. Mr. Williams, thank you so much. Sir, the mic is yours.
Well, thanks, Tom. I think it's so incredibly important to bring everybody together, and I want to appreciate all the work you guys have done to bring people together, because it's about sharing information and working together. And Supervisor, especially Aiden Holtzman, couldn't have said it better. You know, we're all trying to work together to figure out what the issues are, how to best work together to defeat these horrible crimes. And also, I want to give my appreciation to Commander Magruder of the 20th District. He's incredibly proactive. There's an open door policy there. I think for both, Agent Holtzman and Commander Magruder, sharing that information, building those relationships. If you're not sure about something, say something, bring it to them, let them decide. Don't let it stop still. A lot of these crimes, people don't even know they're victims of crimes because we're trying to put the whole piece together, like the whole picture. And you could have a small part of something that you see that you're like, well, I don't know. If you're not sure, let the information flow. And it's really incredibly important, because if they don't have it, they can't do anything with it. So I appreciate their being proactive. And I know Commander Gruden in 20th District has been incredibly proactive, and we appreciate this relationship. So, going on, and this presentation is about giving you some information about how the law works, what we see, how investigations work, so you can kind of understand a little bit about the hate crime statutes and what happens. And obviously they're widespread. This is not specifically about anti-Asian hate, but of course it's really come to the precipice recently. So it's something that we need to address. And I believe this is just the beginning of the conversation. So in the future, if anybody has any questions or information needs to reach out, my information is at the end of this. We hope to continue this dialogue down the road. Let's go to the next slide. So one thing I want to talk about, and kind of intertwine a case that we had a few years ago to kind of understand what we do. This is the Loop Synagogue, beautiful stained glass windows. It's downtown. And we had an incident there. We go on the next slide and show what occurred. Now you can see a car pull around the corner. It's about at 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. Individual parks his car in front. And just to your left, if you're looking at the screen, are the front windows, not the sanctuary, but the entrance. Runs up. And there you can't see, but he's placing 2 stickers on the front door of the synagogue. After he places stickers, he pulls a bike lock from his and smashes all the glass and flees. So we can go to the next slide when this is done. So here's a little remnants. In the middle of the director of the synagogue, Lee Zeldin, with the Chicago Police Department as they began their investigation. Go to the next slide. And this is what he left. Attacks on hate crimes, it's important to understand that most hate crimes that are prosecuted, we'll talk about this, at a local level, they're misdemeanor crimes that have been elevated based upon the fact that the motive is hate. And in essence, it's a criminal damage to property, which is a misdemeanor being maximum time in jail less than a year, as opposed to a felony, which is a year plus. It elevates to a felony because of the seriousness of it. And it's because of what it emotes, what it attacks. It's not just a smashing of a window. It's to trying to terrorize a people, a group, a minority from whatever protected class it is, and to try and attack that group. And people who are part of that group may not be a part of the synagogue, but from all over the city or nation, I'm sure you've seen attacks ever across the country affect you personally and are very heartfelt and very damaging to you. And you question about your safety and security within the community and in the society. So one of the things that's important, let me go to the next slide, is I talked to Lee Zeldin, the director of synagogue, after this happened, about what this means to her. And many of our victims are bewildered, and people have kind of across the spectrum different responses to it, right? Some are confused. They may not remember the details. Some just want to say, we don't want to be a part of this. We want to separate ourselves from it. Some are in shock and are frozen. Others become angry and want to fight back. Others try to say, well, this happens all the time. It's just a rock. It's just this, and minimize it. They don't want to talk about the bias. They want to talk about just the physical harm. Oh, the window is broken. Can you believe it? Not the greater impact of what happened. Or if somebody gets attacked, oh, they're okay. They just, had to go home. It's really about more than that. And it's compounded again by historically different groups who have been attacked and discriminated against and prejudiced against. So it's more than just the simplicity of the actual act. It's what it stands for and why these are so important. If we go to the next slide. So, and one of the key things, and something that the FBI, especially Holtzman, has talked about, and Commander Magruder has talked about, is there's a tremendous amount of underreporting in this. And why is that happen? Many people are fearful of re-victimization. They don't want to put themselves out there to be attacked again. They don't want to, share in public what happened to them. They maybe feel humiliated or embarrassed by it. In other communities, attacks on the gay community, people don't want to be outed or put in the spotlight. They want to keep themselves private. Others don't have a relationship or may fear law enforcement and not sure how law enforcement is going to respond. Others have maybe fearful of immigration status, INS issues, that they don't want to come forward. They lack support. Luckily, in the synagogue case, they had the whole community supported them. Minorities, the Muslim community, Catholic Christian community came out and supported them as part of it. Another thing is cultural and language barriers. When they have the police, they're dealing with the police or explaining themselves, articulating, they just don't want to deal with it. It's a big problem. And then lastly, they may not even be aware that they're a victim of a hate crime, right? So if somebody comes along, and we've seen these situations, right? Somebody gets hit in the face or somebody smashes a window. These could all be part and parcel with a bigger activity of hate crimes in the area. So that's why, for many of these reasons, we want to work with communities that feel that suffer from, having these issues they're dealing with. It's not just the fact that I was a victim of a crime. Now I'm going to call the police and I'm going to be aggressive and we're going to get the guys. There's many layers to what's happening and why. But I think for law enforcement to attack the people who do these horrible crimes, that we need to work with the community and the people who are victims and the people who are their friends and build that support so they can bring it forward. Because if they don't bring it forward, then the information is not there, the investigation can't begin, and certainly prosecution can't begin. So as difficult as it may be, we need to create that community around it. And I know that we have resources, I'm sure the FBI does, and LCPD, to work with victims and witnesses to help them through this. And other groups like Tom's group and everybody else whose other groups are part of this, to try and support people who are in these situations, to not keep this information for themselves, but actually share it. And then we'll work together to figure out how to deal with it. You go to the next slide, please. And of course, when you're talking about a broad range of things, it's most important to attack it at the bias level, right? At the very earliest levels of hate and prejudice, to educate the community and educate the public on what's happening so they don't rise to the level of hate. This still happens, obviously, but it's something on a grander scale, a public policy scale, educating people on why they shouldn't hate. It seems like a ridiculous notion, but it's something that we have to always be vigilant about. Go to the next slide. So one of the things that's important too is understanding the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident, right? There are unfortunately many hateful, disgusting individuals out there who want to spew their hate, right? Hate incidents are non-criminal, right? The people marching, no matter what they're saying, people have a First Amendment right to say their horrible, hateful things. A hate crime is when they combine that motive with a criminal act, with an attack. Go to the next slide. However, the First Amendment speaks to this. There's some more on here. Sorry, Melanie. Is that, people have a right to protest these horrible things and be out in the public. There's one more picture, I think. But when that language, that First Amendment right is limited to the fact that when it's combined with a criminal act, that hate speech kicks it up into a felony. So, in many cases, murder cases, we don't have to prove motive. That's not an element of the offense. You have to prove the act. In a hate crime, you have to prove that it's based on a motive. And we'll talk about those motives. But oftentimes people also get upset because there's a murder takes place or an armed robbery or something that comes along with a hate crime. Think about the murder statutes are somebody's going to be sentenced to 20 years at the minimum, all the way to natural life. In a hate crime, you're mostly looking at misdemeanor offenses that are based upon hate that are enhanced due to that hate. And the reason it's important because we identify those individuals and make them accountable for their actions. And then also we know what they've done in the past to stop that crime from escalating into more violence. Go to the next slide, please. So again, when you're talking about hate, bias, motivation, again, it should be reported, please, even if it's a non-criminal event. Because in these situations, it's important that people have identified themselves as hating a particular group. These individuals may escalate their actions, right? So police and other investigators may not be able to investigate things that are not criminal. However, there are also a lot of nonprofit organizations, the Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Poverty Law Center, who try and identify groups or individuals who kind of are expounding hate that in the future may lead to criminal charges depending on their acts. And this is important in the next slide. Something that we have as a tool, when people commit a crime or charged with a crime, we can go back and look at their past acts, right? So if they say, no, this wasn't a hate crime, I don't hate people, I don't do those things. If we have previous information about things that they've done, it's hard for them to argue, I don't hate. We say, well, look at these 4 events previous to you being charged that you did. It shows that this wasn't just a one-off incident. This was a motivation that you intended to put on others. It's what is in their intent. And these are impactful not only for the charges, but also for sentencing. So you may not see a hate crime connected to a murder because the murder itself is a more serious offense. But you may see the motivation in the what's called aggravation in the sentencing because of what they did. They could be serving a longer period of time. So let's just go on to the next slide. So I'm going to look at the hate crime statutes, right? Let's go. We can keep going. These are the Illinois hate crime statutes. So it happens is somebody committing a misdemeanor, any of these offenses, you know, and these are, like I said, for the most part, we look at society low-level crimes, right? Assault, simple batteries, criminal damage of properties. Those are things that we see. Harassment. Most of the times, if somebody's charged with these, it's going to be a year minus a day. That's what I often talk about, that the potential for charging is in jail. And if they commit one of these misdemeanor offenses, with the next slide, please, by reason of actual or perceived of any of these protected classes, right? Race, creed, color, religion, ancestry, gender, sexual identity. These are all protected classes. So if they commit a misdemeanor by reason of actual or perceived class, they can be charged with a felony. And we just go next slide, please. Felony, usually class 4, punishable by 1 to 3 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. And it could be enhanced to a second-class felony, which goes up higher and is more serious in crimes for a second offense. They can also get probation. There are various conditions that are placed individuals who get probation for hate crimes. Victim impact statement, 200 hours community service, hate crime probation to see what they're doing, fines, and civil damages. Next slide, please. So, you know, this is, you know, I don't mean to, you know, be funny, but this is kind of to show that hate crimes come in many different shapes and sizes, right? It can't be classified or clarified in one, you know, simple way. There are many attacks by many different people, and you have to take investigations for what they are. Hate comes in many different forms and functions, and we need to identify those individuals who commit hate crimes, regardless of where they're from, who they are, or their backgrounds. Next slide, please. So when you talk about motives, what we have to do is show for motives in hate crime. You do not need to prove that the offender hates all members of a targeted group, only, or even the actual victim, only that the offender committed the crime by reason of that protected class. So if an individual, the example, targets a gay man because he believes they're more vulnerable to attack, that could be considered hate crime because he's separating and focusing on a particular individual based upon who they are and then committing a crime upon them. Let's go to the next slide, please. And when it says actually perceived, these words make it clear that a mistake by an offender, you know, it doesn't matter if they actually properly target an individual, right? It's what their intent was, that in their intent, they intended to attack a protected individual in this protected class. So, you know, in the example that if they target somebody because they believe they're Arab ancestry, but they're Latino, it doesn't matter. Like, oh, I didn't mean to attack the Latino. It doesn't matter because they are taking hate to attack a particular class. Go to the next slide, please. And again, mixed motives also. You know, this is also common to see, right? In which an incident sparks up, there's a criminal action that takes place. During the course of that criminal action, somebody starts using, or it escalates because of their perceived, the victim's perceived background. And they start using racial slanders. They start saying certain things that leads this into a hate crime, right? So a fight on the street, a fight, you know, by the bars, a road rage incident that you may see spark up into something. So it's important to understand that the motive doesn't have to be like they're sitting around thinking like, I'm going to go get these people or this class of people. It's something that during the course of the crime or because part of that crime involves a protected class and combined with that misdemeanor that it can be enhanced. Next slide. So one of the key things that I think is important to understand, and this is the individual who was Stuart Wright, who was investigated by Chicago police and arrested by them in the Loop Synagogue attack. So here you see certainly symbols of hate. One, you see a very short haircut, reminiscent of skinheads who are in affiliation oftentimes with white supremacy. A swastika, obviously a clear symbol of hate in America. And when you arrest an individual, and what's important in the investigation that we see is to identify what type of offender do we have? Is this somebody who's acting on their own, a lone wolf, somebody who's with a organization, somebody who's financed, somebody who's committed other crimes, somebody who's planning additional crimes? You know, what is communication? What do we see? And that's why it's important to further these investigations. And that's why it's important to get all the information you can have. So we have basic types of offenders that, of course, the array changes and nobody often fits in one group. But when you're looking at different things, you see different places. So if you go to the next slide. So you have, you know, thrill seekers, right? Those may be small groups of individuals, youth, skinhead organizations sometimes that go out and create graffiti, attack groups on the spur of a moment, motivated by just doing what they feel like they're doing that day. Next slide. And then reactive types, right? Those who generally hateful, don't show lack of tolerance. We've seen this, I think, recently. This has come to the forefront that people are very, I would say, been more aggressive in speaking out their hates in public and what they believe belongs to them and perceived outsiders. So this is another type of individuals that may see localized when you hear people say, well, they're taking my job, they're doing this, they're doing that. Reactive offenders that are act in those ways. Have the next slide, please. And then lastly, the part I want to cover is organized groups. You know, and this could be, you know, of course, you've heard there's been a lot in the news about this. These individuals who are mission related, they have online presences, they look to radicalize, recruit members nationally. They're financed, they have other chapters, organizations nationally. And it's important when we identify an offender here to figure out who is he and what is he. You know, Stuart Wright, the offender earlier that I showed with the Loop Synagogue, he had some severe mental illnesses. He had some, but he was not connected to another organization. But we didn't know that going in, and it's important to know that. So as much information to be gathered about an individual to find out what they're doing, and oftentimes that's why those hate incidents are important too to understand, to see what individuals involved in, what's in their mind, who they're connected with. Is this the first of many attacks? Is this the first of one? So if we can go to the next slide, please. And of course, there's lists of, this is one that is created by the Southern Poverty Law Center. If you're interested in more information, they have a great website. The Anti-Defamation League has a great website. These are identified groups here in Illinois that basically expound hate. Now, they have a First Amendment right to spew their hate. However, they may be involved or connected to criminal activity, or people or their members could be involved in criminal activity. And it's important to understand if they work back, to do a long-term investigation to see if an individual is connected to a certain group, has been financed by a group, or other activities involved. Go to the next slide, please. The hate crime investigation is extremely important in how this develops. Next slide. So the investigation, one, when somebody gets to, and I don't have to tell, you know, we've got obviously the police investigators who know what they're doing, get to it, that they must collect information about specific acts and words used by the subject. It's important when something happens that individuals and the police, now we have obviously professional individuals, the FBI, the Chicago police, but there are other places in time in which people may not be as reactive and know how important this is, because you have to identify a motivation for a crime. And to do this, what people say, how they say it, the tattoos, also slang words, code numbers, all these things that occur during the course of crime will be essential down the road in proving it. Okay, the next slide, please. So some things that, and again, every case is individual, all circumstances individual, but it's important to try and create a circumstantial case to understand it. So it's important to get the perceptions of victims as witnesses about the crime. What do you think occurred? What do you think happened? Talking to witnesses about what they've seen, things that they might necessarily draw upon to understand why it's important at the time, but that becomes important later on when you're bringing all the pieces together. Includes like gestures and written statements, something that people may not know. You know, statements and graffiti and symbols that you may not understand. You know, they all write, you know, have this okay symbol they've talked about recently. Things that may seem natural in the course of things, but to a trained investigator, other information may be important when putting together the puzzle. Also, something you or a victim may not understand is that there are maybe a pattern of incidents in the area. Maybe this neighborhood is being attacked in many different ways in different courses over time. So identifying that pattern is something that law enforcement will be bringing together. And that's why it's so important to know and for people to share the information, because if they don't see it, one incident is not going to help them. But if you identify a number of incidents, then they maybe develop a pattern and see what is happening and how it's happening and why it's so important. Next. Secondly, looking at the victim, were they engaged in other activities to promote this group or community? Whether the incident coincides, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. But it's important for everybody to learn, right? No matter what age, that what we do to work together. That incidents coincide with a holiday. You know, sometimes an incident may happen, like Hitler's birthday, there's an attack, and people who are not informed and know the knowledge of that may see that there's how it coincides with something and provide another motive for why something happens. And the involvement of organized hate groups or their members. So all this is incredibly important. Can we go next slide, please? And the look of absence for any other, motivation, such as economic gain. You know, most crimes that we see are often occurred, there's some motivation about making money, stealing, theft. If you don't see it, like, you have to understand why are they doing what they're doing and then pushing it forward. Also symbols of hate, you know, and we've seen these and many of us are aware what is a common symbol of hate, but to identify these, you know, and there's a couple of pictures here, if you could just forward the, that we see tattoos as a way that people have used to identify themselves. Obviously, other acts that are used to try and show that they're burning crosses or provide intimidation. And then other messages that are showing that they're trying to communicate with others within their group that may not be readily identifiable, somebody who don't know, but like 14 and 88, right? 14 words they talk about in the white supremacist community. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. So if you see the number 14, that may be an indication. 88, which is the 8th letter, H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. So an 88 is representative of Heil Hitler. So if you go to the next slide, please. And again, these symbols that may not be outwardly recognizable by common citizens, but are certainly identifiable by members of those groups or people who are involved in hate crimes or the white supremacist movement in particular. Go to the next slide. And these are the things you may see, right? So if you saw this, somebody's got some dice. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know what it means. Well, those 8-8, right? On those dice, or a tattoo of 1488. I don't know what that means. But these are definitely symbols that people are expressing to others in the community so they know what it means to tie it together. Go to the next slide, please. So, you know, back to our case that we had. Luckily, the Chicago police were extremely vigilant and on top of this investigation. Luckily, in this case, you know, as I said, the defendant left his fingerprints on the inside of these lovely swastika stickers. Thankfully for us, he was not the best of criminals. Go next slide, please. Later on, that defendant was also identified. This is him at St. Sabina, a church on the south side where he's doing some of his community service, where he wrote an 88 on his forehead. And obviously we know now an 88 stands for Heil Hitler, somebody who's clearly indoctrinated. But again, it's important to understand what to do with these individuals and how to react with them, what to treat them. This individual, we tried to put in a number of services to try and to manage his mental illness and also his indoctrination into the hate that he felt. He obviously violated that. You keep going to the next slide, please. I know the symbols of hate we talked about. I'm sorry, next slide. Yes. We keep going because I kind of talked through this already. He was sent out and identified by another individual, confidence informant who knew this individual. That combined with the Chicago police work to get the fingerprints off the stickers led to his arrest and prosecution. Next page. There was a print comparison done. He's identified, he's brought in. And what we did, if we go to the next screen, in order to then determine who this individual is, we went through his computers, went through his phones, I went through his social media accounts to find out who is he and what he's about. Again, is he connected to the groups, is he financed? And this is what we have to work together with all law enforcement, private sector, nonprofit groups to figure out if he's been involved in other activities, other attacks. Next slide. He eventually is violated, is sentenced to 36 months in the Illinois Department of Corrections, where he was held accountable for his act. This is an extremely long sentence for what would normally be a criminal damage of property. Without a prior offense, he'd probably be looking at a simple probation, if not a supervision. But because it was based in hate crime, because of what he did, and because of how it fit in, and because of the damage that he was trying to create, he's held ultimately responsible and accountable. But it's important when I talk about all the different areas that we discussed that we work together. It's important that we understand the expanse and intent of what's occurring. It's important that the communities who are being victimized and attacked come together and work together. Because if the information is not there to share, if they're not helping put forward what is happening, that it prevents law enforcement and prevents prosecution going forward to fully understand the extent and damage of this crime and to hold people accountable. So we can go to the next slide. So I just want to encourage you, and again, I want to thank everybody who came to this panel today, Tom and his group, and the FBI and Commander McGrudin for really putting it together, because this is where it starts. It starts in this dialogue, it starts working together, it starts pushing these cases forward. And again, I think one of the most important things that both the commander and the special agent said is that if you're not sure, share that information, right? If today I'm not sure about this, I don't know what happens, I don't know the whole picture, this is what I saw, I want to let you guys know. Again, it could be tied to something bigger, and this happens all the time. It's just a piece of the puzzle that you may be holding on to, and if you don't share it, we may lose an opportunity to hold somebody accountable or to prevent more serious violent actions as these types of crimes escalate and attack the community. So we want to be a part of that. I want to appreciate your time and everything that you guys have put in. Please, as I said, this is just the first step. We hope to continue a dialogue. If people want to meet in person, they want to talk in person or on Zoom. Either way, you know, we want people to be safe. I'm happy to meet with people to talk about how we can further the experience and build that trust and build that community. Everybody wants to push it forward. So even though that first step of contacting law enforcement, if you haven't had good experiences in the past, if you're uncertain how to do it, if there's a language barrier, if there's a cultural barrier, we need to overcome that. There are groups out there like Tommy's group and other groups that are on this who can help broach that gap, and that's what we want to do. So again, thank you for your time. I'm going to stop now to open up for any questions. I apologize if I went longer than optimal.
No, thank you so much, Mr. Williams. We really appreciate that insightful and informative presentation. We did have one comment come from the audience. Could you clarify on the First Amendment that, let me read the comment here, that does not protect bad actors, private citizens from hateful, insightful speech against another private citizen or organization, such as private employers, but the First Amendment only protects the bad actor from the government. So if a bad actor, private citizen spews hateful words he or she can be fired or otherwise reprimanded by his or her private employer. Could you provide some insight and clarification?
Sure. I mean, what I could say is, so I'm a criminal prosecutor, right? I'm not a civil lawyer, and that goes under employment law. So when we're talking about people's rights or their attacks, even as offensive and hateful that can be in the workplace, that's a different set of laws that people are dealing with. We're talking about holding people criminally responsible. So when we're talking about taking somebody's liberty, meaning putting somebody in jail or putting them under the jurisdiction of the court. So the laws are different when they commit a criminal act. Now, private companies, they have their own set of rules that they go by about what they feel is appropriate for employees to do. And I would encourage those, companies will hopefully be responsible in holding people accountable within their communities. But we are responsible for holding people accountable within the state of Illinois who violate crime. So those issues that may not raise the level of criminal activity for us to prosecute, but may be held accountable within private organizations, have a separate standard.
I'd like to open up our next question to the entire group. So what are the strategies that can be taken as preventative measures? Maybe Joel, I'll ask you to kick this one off.
Yeah, I'll start, but I'm really going to say that I think this is the commander's realm, because quite frankly, if I could answer how to prevent hate crimes, I'd probably be up for some sort of Nobel Peace Prize. The fact is that hate exists, and preventing hate crimes is really about preventing violent crime, preventing all crime, and steps that we can do to protect ourselves and to stay safe. And then specific to hate crimes, trying to address them before they become a violent act. There is a continuum, as Mr. Williams showed, that starts with, say, hate speech, or there are tattoos, there are symbols that are recognizable to the public that we can all observe. And if we're reporting these things, perhaps we can stop something before it happens. And that really is incumbent on the public. It's incumbent on you all as community leaders to listen to the people in your community and report things that you hear from them. That's the additional step on top of how we prevent all crime, and how we can address hate crime is to address that hate before it becomes a violent act. We're never going to be able to get rid of all crime. It's a sad fact of life, but we can recognize hate before it escalates. And I'd open it to the commander in terms of maybe preventative steps for violent crime.
Again, with the preventing violent crime, again, I'll mention that in our district, again, we're blessed to have a very low crime district compared to other parts of the city. But again, that doesn't mean that there's no crime. Now, what we have seen, in some of the street robberies, like in our district, the area around Argyle, Broadway, Sheridan, that's also there's a very strong and thriving and vibrant Vietnamese and Asian, Chinese, and extended Asian population there. And there's also people who they don't live there, but they come in to visit that area as well too. So one thing we just want people to be aware of is just situational awareness. If they're coming in on the red line, the red line runs right through the district and actually stops right at Argyle, just to be aware, not to be distracted. And sometimes we're so used to our cell phones now, it's just everywhere. But sometimes folks will be on the train and looking at their cell phone, and there's people who look specifically for that. It's almost like you're holding a lot of money in your hand in some cases. So what they'll do sometimes is they'll look to see who is on the train as it approaches a stop. Now, that person holding the cell phone and looking at their cell phone might not be intending to get off at that stop, but the bad guy on the train, he's going to say, well, now's my time. I'm going to try and time this just right. As the doors open, I grab that cell phone and I run off the train at that location. And the person, sometimes it happens so fast, they're not even sure which way the guy went or anything along those lines. So again, just situational awareness, watch what you're doing. One of our big things is just trust your instincts. Sometimes people call that sixth sense or your spidey sense. If I can reach back to the cartoon days, superhero Spider-Man, his spidey sense is tingling when there's evil around. So again, sometimes just trust your instincts. If something doesn't seem right, Someone's looking at a person who maybe just came out of the store and is counting their money, and now that person's starting to walk closer. Well, maybe that's an indication. Maybe it's time to go back in the store and just make sure you're around somebody. Again, situational awareness, getting out of the car. We see a lot of times where, again, this is not directed at any specific group. It's just a way to be safe in our Asian community here in the district. And they leave a car running. We read and say, well, I'm only going to go outside, be out of the car for a minute. There's guys who are actively traveling. They're coming, they travel from different parts of the city. They're looking for people leaving their cars running where I'm just going to run to the store for a minute while I pump some gas or I pick up my order. Sometimes it's the delivery drivers who are dropping off food that's been ordered, sometimes from the restaurants in our district. And they leave the car running just to go and to walk up the stairs and deliver that food order. And someone just jumps in the car and takes off. So that's our main thing. Now, thankfully, we haven't had a lot of, again, even graffiti or, signs being posted or anything like that have any sort of hateful messages. But if someone does see that, we would like to be aware of that, because we can file a report on that saying it's not a criminal incident at this matter, but it's something concerning. If someone's advocating any sort of racial crimes or hate against a certain group or segment of society, whatever the case may be. Now we can start saying, okay, are we seeing this somewhere else? We communicate with other districts. Is this showing up anyplace else? Do we have any suspects? We can start looking back through video cameras. Is there someone posting this sign somewhere? Is someone come up and putting these stickers up on the light poles or at the train stations or something along those lines? And then we can walk it back. The issue of tattoos came up. Now, when we make an arrest, we try to remind our officers always to document any tattoos that somebody might have. So whether it's some sort of, whether it's a gang tattoo or in this case, along the lines of hate, something like that was mentioned at 1488 or the swastika tattoos or some other variants of some sort of tattoos along those lines. We document those so that if we do get a video, some video recovered from a certain crime, maybe that person, that tattoo is revealed in some of the video. And sometimes we see people as they walk up to a scene where they're intending to do some sort of crime, they'll put their mask on. But then half a block away or 2 blocks away, they didn't have their mask on. So sometimes we can track it back like that and we say, this guy does have a tattoo on his forehead or his cheek, or we can see his hand, and he does have some sort of tattoo. We can look through our databases and link that sometimes to a possible offender, or at least develop a suspect. So again, it's just the reporting, the day-to-day steps. If someone sees something, please trust your instincts, make yourself as safe as possible, but then you can report it. And like we mentioned, that somebody, casing a location, checking out a business or something like that. Maybe that's not a crime at the moment, but certainly suspicious. So we don't have to wait till someone actually smashes a window or does something along those lines. We did see some of the graffiti earlier in the year, but that was more of the anarchy and Antifa and down with society sort of stuff. But they'll look around, they'll have someone checking the street, looking up and down the street. And then when they feel that the coast is clear, then they'll go ahead and do the spray painting or whatever they would do. So someone doesn't have to wait till that actual criminal act takes place. If it just looks suspicious, hey, why are these folks out here? Why are they walking around the corners? Why are they looking up and down the streets? Trust your instincts. Call us and let us take that next step and delve into that a little bit more. Okay.
Thank you. We're nearing the end of our time, but I do want to ask one more question. Some of our neighbors fear retaliation from offenders if they report a crime or hate crime. What should they do to prevent or address that fear, especially for our local business owners or staff who are regularly in their business location?
Well, if I can jump in with that again too. I know that's a lot of time, there are instances of retaliation. And I know the TVs and the movies always like to play that up a little bit, but in actuality, we don't see that very often. Now, it does take courage to come forward, and it does take a commitment to the neighborhood and to the businesses for people to come forward and say, hey, I do want to make that phone call. Now, people can make an anonymous call about some suspicious activity, but if some crime has actually occurred, then in order for us to follow through with that, the actual victim themselves doesn't have to indicate that they want to pursue that matter in court. Now, as a condition of that person's, if they're on bond or if they're being held in custody, sometimes we can make it also be known that, hey, you're not allowed to return to that property, which would then enhance if they did come back and we could arrest them again, they would enhance the sentence of that. There's also a felony charge for any sort of witness intimidation. So if someone does come back and threaten, hey, you better not follow through in court, or you better not do this, well, what might have been a misdemeanor charge prior to that, now we could with the help of the state's attorney's office, seek felony charges against those, which has a much greater penalty. So that's one of the things. But it does take courage to come forward and call the police and say, yeah, I want to make a difference with this. But when people don't do it, that emboldens the criminal, and that lets them know that, hey, if I just try to be the tough guy and try to intimidate people, then I can get away with doing whatever I want. And we definitely don't want to send that message. So we do ask people to stand up. We can help them as much as we can, and we can stand there, go through the process with them. We have court advocacy volunteers, people from our district who are willing to go to court with victims, just help them through that process, to be a moral support. I've attended court on some cases as well too, and some of my officers where we know there's definitely a vested interest in making sure that justice is done and that there is responsibility detailed out for these actions. So that's something we will do as well too. We've driven people to court before. I know our right here in the district, we're blessed to have the Community Justice Center, where we have a state's attorney who is assigned to specifically look at issues for our district. So covers the 19th district as well too. But there's times when we're able to go to him and say, this is a case that's very important to the community. And we've seen that on Argyle before, where we've had some of these folks who were disruptive, again, not necessarily, any hate bias or anything like that, but very disruptive to the businesses, to passerbys, to diners, to customers who were shopping or traveling in that area. And working with those folks and with the court advocacy and going to court on these cases ourselves, we've been able to get that guy off the street. Some people will know who I'm talking about in regards to that. But again, that was the community coming together, working with us as the police department, also working with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to really push that forward and letting the judge know that this is a very important issue to the community. So we can have that support systems as well too.
Great. Thank you so much, Commander. And thank you so much to all our speakers, Mr. David Williams for that insightful presentation. Adrian Holtzman, thank you so much for being here today. I'd also like to thank our board of directors at Chinese Mutual Aid Association, our co-founder, Yimin Veen, and all our staff for joining us today. And thank you to all our community partners, Asian American Bar Association, Apnagar, Cambodian Association of Illinois, Chinese American Bar Association, President Jansing of the Chinese American Association of Greater Chicago, Chinese American Service League, the Filipino American Lawyers Association, Japanese American Service Committee, and then our friends at the Uptown Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for partnering with us today. I'd also like to recognize a few special guests. Thank you to Illinois Department of Human Rights Director Jim Bennett, Abby Eusebio of the Illinois Attorney General's Office, Tran Yuen and Seth Jenkins of Senator Durbin's office, and Jessica Baxter of Congressman Quigley's office. Also our very own Alderman Harry Osterman and Alderman Kappelman. Thank you so much for your support and partnership. Again, final thanks to our speakers and to all our attendees for joining us. Thank you, and we'll do this again soon.